This episode is brought to you by King of Beards. This is my online shop where you can find high quality products that will help you grow a strong, healthy beard that not only looks great, but also will smell great as well. Definitely the people in your life that like to get up and close with you are gonna thank you for this one. These are products that I use personally. The link is below in the video description section, and if you use my coupon code KING, you'll get 15% off on your first order. During ancient times, Muslims used DAWAH, or inviting others to engage with the message of Islam. Prophet Muhammad, he preached to people individually, but as most of Makkah belonged to the elite class, they saw the message as a threat to their political, religious, and social and economic status in Makkah. However, despite the hostile position of the Meccan leaders, the message of Islam gradually attracted not only the weak and poor of Makkah, but many of the elite people themselves. After that, Prophet Muhammad began preaching the message and teaching the Quran, which made the religion spread. Islam also spread through Sufism. Sufism contributed to the Islamization not only in Central Asia, but also in Kashmir, a disputed territory in the Himalayas foothills with population of upwards of 95% Muslim. Sufism came during the period of the Fatimid Caliphate, and the Sufis started preaching Islam from the time of the Delhi Sultanate to the Mughal era in the Indian subcontinent. Sachal Sarmas, Baba Bule Shah, Shah Wali Ullah, and Data Ganj Bakhsh are some of the prominent Sufis who helped align the local values and the practices with Islamic teachings. Next, at number 8, we're going to be looking at the spread of Islam throughout Asia. Islamic groups maintained control of most Asian land for a long period of time. Arab Muslims spread Islam into Turkish and Persian kingdoms, which then expanded into Central Asia. In Central Asia, Islam gradually spread as cultures and ethnic groups mixed together. And now today, when we look, most of Central Asian nations are actually Islamic nations now. Muslims conquered part of South Asia from India to Bangladesh and began the Delhi Sultanate. Now, in the year 1526, the Mughal Empire descended from the Mongolians, expanded the Muslim territory, and filled the southern Asian land with Muslim art and architecture. From there, let's talk about the spread in Indonesia and China. Most of Indonesia converted to Islam under the influence of the Sufis in the 13th century. Islam also spread through merchant activities by Arab Muslim traders and adoption by local rulers. And today, Indonesia has the highest Muslim population in the entire world. And that comes as a surprise to a lot of people because most people think that most Muslims are in Arab countries, but that's actually not the case. Either way, Islam reached China also during the Tang and Song dynasties from 618 to 1279 via the overland and the maritime Silk Roads. Arabian and Persian traders built tombs and mosques combining traditional Arab and Chinese architectures, intermarried with local Chinese, and also raised the first generation of Chinese-speaking Muslims. However, only 2% of China's population is Muslim today. Alright, for number 6, let's look at the spread of Islam in Africa. Islam entered Africa from different places. First, Arab traders came from Asia into North Africa and moved through the Sahara to West Africa. The first African converts to Islam were merchants in Sudan, followed by some kings and their royal courts. However, the peasants initially maintained their local faiths and converted after some time to Islam. Gao was the first place where the king of Ghana converted, and then Muslims established a kingdom in Mali from the 13th century to the 15th century. Mansa Musa was the king of Mali, and he built the capital city called Timbuktu, where Muslim scholars taught and wrote Islamic law. Between the years 1878 and 1924, Muslim immigrants from the Middle East, more specifically Syria and Lebanon, they started arriving in places like Ohio, Michigan, as well as North Dakota and South Dakota. So like most people that immigrate to America, they were just seeking, better jobs, better work opportunities, opportunities and what they had in their homeland. And history shows that one of the biggest employers of Muslim migrants was the Ford Company. So there was a lot of manual labor work for them to do. They were able to make American dollars, send it back home to support their family members, as well as build a life for themselves in America. At the same time, there was a great migration of blacks to the north, and this helped the African American Islam revival and the growth of the African American Muslim nationalist movement that, of course, is still alive and existing today. And this movement hopes to restore the faith and the culture that was destroyed during the slave era. During the 1930s and 1940s in America, Middle Eastern Muslims, when they started moving in, they started gathering together into small communities and setting up mosques to go and worship. However, African American Muslims already had their own mosques set up. They were doing their worship practices. So that continued for some time. Islam started to grow a little bit by bit. And an entirely new group of Muslims came from places such as Palestine. And several years before that, many Palestinians migrated to the United States. This was after the establishment of Israel. Also, immigrants from Iraq and Egypt started migrating to America. And in the 1960s, we saw a massive wave of Southeast Asian Muslims also coming to America. And Muslims also came from Africa, other parts of Asia, as well as Latin America. Okay, so that was a little bit of history of how the growth of Islam really started picking up in the United States. So let's fast forward it now to present day. Now I'm sure we're aware of the many different debates about immigrants in the United States, especially when it comes to immigrants from Muslim countries. But to really find out the amount of Muslims that live in the United States is a pretty difficult question to answer. Even though it may seem simple to answer, just any statistics anyways, it's always based on an estimate. But on top of that, the US Census Bureau collects statistics for housing, population, business, as well as the economy, government statistics, and information related to health, transportation, education, etc. But it doesn't ask questions about religion. So there's no official government count of the actual amount of Muslims that live in America. However, we do have a pretty good estimate based on the latest data that's available. The Pew Research Group, who's a private, non-profit organization, they're very reputable. Based on their data that they collected, they estimate that there's 3.45 million Muslims that live in America. And this is based on the data from the year 2017. We haven't fully gotten the 2018 data in yet, but based on this data, we see that Muslims make up 1.1% of the entire American population. So not that big at all. However, despite Muslims being a tiny drop in the overall population of the United States of America, we do see that Islam is growing and fast. Of course, Muslims in the United States aren't as large as other religious groups like Christians as well as Jews, yet projections suggest that in the United States, the Muslim population will grow much faster than the American Jewish population. And by the year 2040, Muslims will surpass Jews and become America's second largest religious group, next to, of course, Christianity. They also estimate that by the year 2050, the US Muslim population is projected to reach 8.1 million or 2.1% of the nation's total population. And now this is almost double what it is today. So why is it that in the next 30 years, Islam is going to double in population in America? Two biggest factors, according to Pew Research Group, of course, one is immigration. The latest numbers indicate that there were a total of 38,901 Muslims that migrated to the US in the year 2016. And that's actually 46% of the entire amount of people who immigrated to the US that year. So almost 50% of those people that immigrated were Muslim. Let's start by taking a look at why the Muslim population is growing so fast in Europe and will continue to grow fast in the decades to come. When we look at the year 2010 to 2016 alone, the Muslim population in Europe rose more than 1%, from 3.8% of the total population to 4.9%. And in terms of numbers, that's 19.5 million Muslims increased to 25.8 Muslims. Now, based on the current numbers, by the year 2050, the Muslim population in Europe would more than double, rising to 11.2% or more. And this depends on how much immigration is allowed in Europe in the future. Now, even if in Europe there was a Muslim ban where Muslims could not immigrate there anymore forever, the Muslim population is still estimated to grow to 7.4% in Europe. This is due to the high amount of youth that live in Europe who are Muslim, as well as the high fertility rate of the current Muslim residents. So there's a lot of young people there who have not had children yet, and when they start having children, populations multiply. However, in the year 2010 to 2016, the biggest factor affecting the Muslim population growth in Europe was migration. It's estimated that 2.5 million Muslims came to Europe for reasons other than seeking asylum. And these reasons include, finding jobs, going to school, and 1.3 million of those Muslims already have or expect to receive refugee status, meaning that they'll be staying in Europe. And then we look at the natural growth, which was the second biggest factor. In the Muslim community in Europe, there were 2.9 million more births than deaths during the period of the year 2010 to 2016. And then we look at religious switching, and it's estimated to be a small factor in the Muslim population change, but roughly 160,000 more people converted to Islam during that period. And I did touch on this a little bit, but the Muslim population of youth is a lot higher than other Europeans, as well as they're much younger. And on top of that, they have more children than other Europeans. In 2016, the average age of Muslims throughout Europe was 30.4, and this is 13 years younger than the average age for other Europeans, which was 43.8. So you can also look at it like this: 50% of all the European Muslims are under the age of 30, and this is compared with 32% of non-Muslims in Europe. And on top of that, the average Muslim woman in Europe is expected to have 2.6 children, which is one child more than the average non-Muslim woman, which has 1.6 children. Now, there is some concern inside of the Muslim community in regards to the new laws that are limiting them to enter the country. Some say that the new laws targeting Muslims bring us back to the times when innocent Jewish children were abducted and imprisoned to save them from eternal hellfire. However, it's not just the Muslims who are desperately in search to find more effective solutions that do not alienate Muslims or any other group of people based on their religion or country, but the fears are that history is just gonna repeat itself. Take for instance, in 15th century Catholic Spain, the monarchy set out to solve the Jewish question, and they put a lot of restrictions on Jewish practices. Then they followed up with forced conversion, and the Jewish people were looked down upon because they were not considered Spanish citizens. By the next century, those who had converted to Roman Catholicism during the 14th and the 15th century, they were much more familiar with the Bible than the general Catholic population. And they began to set up a new standard which produced the Protestant Reformation, which resulted in the destruction of the Catholic dominance over Europe. Also in Russia under the Tsar, they also tried to solve the Jewish question through discrimination. And of course, this caused a lot of Jewish people with great minds to join the Bolshevik Revolution, and it almost succeeded in the destruction of Russian Orthodoxy and culture.